Hey guys, what's going on? Jib here, and in today's video, we're going to be doing a little bit of technical analysis on Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency markets, and then we're also going to be covering some news coming out of the SEC as it relates to the Proshares Bitcoin ETF and their decision deadline on it coming up on August the 23rd, 2018. Do you like how I chopped up that title for the intro? I think it turned out pretty well. But anyway, this is not the main Bitcoin ETF that we've been focused on, the VanEck and the SolidX one that got delayed over here on August the 3rd, which caused a small little market crash that eventually led into a much bigger market crash. This is a different Bitcoin ETF among the plethora of Bitcoin ETFs that have been proposed to the SEC over the last year or longer. But the reason that this one is interesting is because its deadline is coming up on August the 23rd. This Bitcoin ETF can no longer be extended. Its deadline can no longer be extended. It is going to either be accepted or it is going to be denied this Thursday or perhaps tomorrow, but most likely this Thursday. So in today's video, we're going to be discussing the ramifications that this will likely have on price action, and then we're also going to be doing some general technical analysis on Bitcoin and try and get an idea of where Bitcoin is going to be going over the next 48 to 72 hours. But before we get into the video, guys, if you enjoyed today's video, definitely consider dropping a like, hitting that subscribe button, and smashing the notification bell, guys. You know I say that every day, but it does help the channel out. So if you want to help the channel out a little bit, those are some ways you can do it. But anyway, let's get right into the video. Bitcoin is currently trading at around $6,437. If we come over here to CoinMarketCap, as usual, that's a little bit higher. We can see Bitcoin is up about 0.7%. Let's give this a little refresh. It's down about 0.25% because the price has moved a little bit since I started recording this video. But we can also see that the entire market seems to be a little bit down. We see some big gain. We see a lot of, well, we don't see any big gainers. I was going to say we see a couple of big losers. We can see Tezos is down by about 15% here. We sort by change over the last 24 hours. We do have some gainers, but the market is overall has slightly neutral, if not a slightly bearish tint. We can see Veritasium, which was up like 21% in yesterday's video, is now down 15%, is having a little correction, it seems. But the entire market, like I said, is rather neutral, if slightly bearish. We're going to see some of that on the Bitcoin chart here in a second. Bitcoin's daily volume is still very, very low. I thought this was just an anomaly when I was recording yesterday because we were coming into the weekend. It was because it was the morning hours of a Monday, but now it's the morning hours of a Tuesday, and I would expect this volume to be a bit higher. I'm not too thrilled to see volume this low. There's a couple of different ways you can read into volume. One of the things you can read into volume is that when you have very low volume, it's much easier to get these big market spikes where you just see Bitcoin go parabolic and it goes up like $300 or $400. It's much easier to do that because there's smaller sell walls and buy walls, and a whale can come in and make a lot more power, make a much bigger effect on the market. That's what I was trying to say. But it's not really a good thing to see market volume this low. We want to see the volume continue to increase so that we can see more liquidity. It's overall just a good thing for the health of the market for the volume to be generally higher. Ethereum's volume is hovering around $1.25 billion. Bitcoin's market capitalization is just over $110 billion, and like we said, price action is around 6,450. Bitcoin's dominance is continuing to rise again. We saw this come down to about 51.5%. Let's go ahead and check the chart here over the last month or so. The Bitcoin market dominance was starting to come down a little bit as the altcoins were having a little bit of a correction, a little bit of a rally, but the Bitcoin dominance has started to go back up now that Bitcoin has been going sideways for a little while, and a lot of the valuation of the altcoins, not a lot of it, but at least some of it has been flowing back into Bitcoin. You can see the last couple of days have seen Bitcoin's its market dominance start to rise a little bit more. I believe that's all we wanted to cover on CoinMarketCap, so let's go ahead and go over to the chart because there's some things that I want to discuss on the chart before we get to the news and start implementing the news into what we have to say about the chart. Let's come in here to the hour chart and get an idea for what's gone on over the last 24 hours because a pretty drastic event did actually happen a little while after recording yesterday's video. You can see Bitcoin was up here trading sideways right around $6,450, which is actually right around where it is now. But we saw Bitcoin form three big red candlesticks. I wouldn't call that three black crows because the one in the middle is a bit too big. But we saw three big red candlesticks that pushed Bitcoin down to a support level of $6,250. And I believe I talked about $6,250 in yesterday's video when I was showing you guys some important things to be keeping an eye on over the next 45 days or so. You can watch that video in the top right if you're interested. I talked about $6,250, but one of the reasons I wasn't considering it a very, very strong level of support is because we had this massive open gap of area where we hadn't got any support back here. So the longer ago a level of support was, the more candlesticks away it is. In general, the less powerful it's going to be. That is not necessarily to say that a level of support from a year ago won't become a level of support now, but in general, there seems to be a very small decrease in the strength of that level of support. So what I was very happy to see was that Bitcoin pulled back, got support down here, and reconfirmed $6,250 as a level of support, because that is really, this pullback yesterday really solidified our position in this kind of horizontal trading channel that we're seeing in between $6,250 and $6,600, because we want Bitcoin to break bullish out of this, not bearish out of it. But to see it going perfectly sideways, now that we have this bottom, we can definitely say that it's basically just going perfectly sideways for right now, waiting for a catalyst of anything to break it out of it. And that very well may be this Bitcoin ETF decision coming up on Thursday. We're going to talk about the ramifications of that. Well, right now, actually, let's go ahead and get onto the news article, and I'll get you guys up to speed on what's going on here. Now, one thing I want to talk about is that we have seen news. Before we talk about this, I want to show you some times that Bitcoin ETFs had an effect on Bitcoin price action as it relates to what the SEC announced about them. The first thing that we want to talk about is the Winklevoss twins. If you guys were familiar with the Winklevoss twins, if you were familiar with their Bitcoin ETF, you will have known, I don't have a news article up to illustrate this, but essentially the Winklevoss twins proposed a Bitcoin ETF to the SEC and based the price action of their Bitcoin ETF off of their own exchange, Gemini. So it was basically bound to get rejected, but when it did get rejected, we saw what happened up here. It got rejected on the 26th of July, and if we zoom in up here, we see a nice little pullback. It got rejected right around there. We see a nice little pullback. Bitcoin, after this rejection from the Winklevoss twins, pulled back, if we'd use the Wixes, to around 5.85%, around 6% Bitcoin pulled back, around $400 to $500, depending on, of course, where you drag this and how much of this you want to attribute to the Winklevoss twins ETF being denied. But we saw Bitcoin pull back around $400. Now, that was a bad piece of news. What happened with a neutral piece of news? Well, we saw recently when the Bitcoin ETF, the main one that we're all focused on, the VanEck SolidX, the VanEck SolidX Bitcoin ETF got rejected, not rejected, delayed back over here, back on August the 7th or August the 6th. It was August the 7th right over here. And we saw Bitcoin pull back around 6%, around $400. And then it broke a level of support at $6,800. And that exasperated the actual pullback. And Bitcoin pulled back like $1,000 down here to around $6,100. Now, how much of that you want to attribute to that, to the Bitcoin ETF being delayed? You can attribute as much of that as you want to the news rather than the technicals, or vice versa. But the point is, whenever the SEC announces any news about ETFs over the last month or so, there has been precedent that an announcement about a Bitcoin ETF, and both of these were either neutral or bad, definitely does have an effect on price action. Now, something else to keep in mind is that both of these Bitcoin ETF proposals, the Winklevoss twins Gemini Bitcoin ETF up here, this one, it did seem to have a much bigger, there seemed to be much more news about it, and a lot of people seem to be looking at it a lot closer. This one, the VanEck and SolidX Bitcoin ETF, it's of course the big Bitcoin ETF that everybody is focused on. I have a video going over that Bitcoin ETF up here in the top right that I recorded a couple months ago, but all the news is still up to date. If you guys are interested in learning more about that Bitcoin ETF, that is a good resource. I also give you guys a bunch of news articles and stuff that you can go read about it to get caught up to speed on that. But both of these Bitcoin ETFs were pretty big Bitcoin ETFs that had a lot of media attention about them. There's not really as much media attention about this one as far as it seems. Over the last couple of days, people have been talking about it because it seems to be the only news on the horizon, and Bitcoin is trading perfectly sideways. If Bitcoin were back at its normal level of volatility and there were normal levels of news coming in, I don't think this would be that big of a deal. But since we are seeing Bitcoin trade sideways here, Bitcoin is doing absolutely nothing but going perfectly sideways, we're going to probably need some news to break either bullish or bearish out of this. And that's one of the things that slightly concerns me about this, is that most people are expecting this Bitcoin ETF to be denied. Now, it cannot be extended anymore because they've extended it enough. They can't extend it anymore by the SEC's own rules. So this is going to be either accepted or denied, and it's probably going to be denied. We'll see what happens. There is, of course, the possibility that it gets accepted, which would, of course, probably be good for price action. Not necessarily, but it most likely would be good for price action. We're going to run with the assumption that's going to be denied. So let's go ahead and read into this article and get caught up on what this Bitcoin ETF actually says. So the little miniature headline here is the SEC is days from its deadline. Regulatory body must decide on Proshares Bitcoin ETF by Thursday. So literally any time from when you're watching this video, or even before the video goes up in theory, to Thursday, which is 2 days from now, the SEC is most likely going to be denying this. I'm going to skip over the first two paragraphs here, and we're going to come down here. Officials within the U.S. Officials within the U.S. Securities Organization. I was expecting Securities and Exchange Organization there, and I misread. Officials within the U.S. Securities Organization are poised to make a decision on both the Proshares Bitcoin ETF and its accompanying short Bitcoin ETF. The deadline, Thursday, August 23rd. The expediency of their decision runs completely against the grain, especially when considering VanEck and SolidX necessitated, I can't speak today, a delay from the SEC for a full verdict. The rule change proposal filed by Proshares in conjunction with NYSE ARCA cannot be delayed any further under the regulators' rules. That is the important thing that we want to be keeping in mind, is that this cannot be delayed any further. It is either going to be accepted or denied. They can't delay it anymore. In contrast to SolidX and VanEck's proposals, the Proshares ETF pitches were submitted to the SEC last December. So these are much, much older, which is one of the reasons why they can't be delayed any further. They've already been delayed and are underpinned by the already existing Bitcoin futures contracts that exist on the market instead of actual physical Bitcoin holdings. Now, this is a phrase that trips some people up. What does physical Bitcoin holding mean? Physical Bitcoin holding just means that the ETF would have a custodian somewhere that is holding Bitcoin in a private key. They're actually siphoning off Bitcoin and buying and selling actual physical Bitcoin that you could put into your own wallet rather than creating an ETF, which is a derivative, in this case, of another derivative. So this is what they're talking about when they say physical Bitcoin holding. They mean that there's a custodian somewhere that is holding the Bitcoin in a private key so that there is actually a record on the blockchain, for example, of this, of the holdings that people have. And this is a major difference. The Proshares Bitcoin ETF derives its value from Bitcoin futures contracts, which are in and of themselves Bitcoin derivatives, and they're trading on CME and the CBOE futures exchange according to the initial filings. Now, the VanEck and SolidX proposals, as we saw up here, they are actually going to have physical Bitcoin. There is going to be a custodian. I believe it's New York Mellon is going to be the custodian, so they are actually going to be holding physical Bitcoin. The Proshares Bitcoin ETF would not be holding physical Bitcoin, which may be one of the reasons that why the SEC may go ahead and deny this. The SEC very well may not want a derivative of a derivative, because the futures markets are also derivatives of a plethora of Bitcoin exchanges. So they may not want a derivative of a derivative, and they also may want the first Bitcoin ETF to be physically backed. I'm not in the SEC, I don't know their motivations on that, but they probably would prefer a physically backed Bitcoin ETF, especially since you can go back and audit everything on the Bitcoin blockchain and see where every single transaction in the history of Bitcoin has gone. So the SEC very well may prefer a physically backed Bitcoin ETF, and that may be one of the reasons that they may potentially deny this. Like I said, we're working on the assumption that they're going to deny it. That's kind of a mean thing to do, but the SEC has had a very long track record of denying Bitcoin ETFs, so I don't think it's an unfounded assumption. The Proshares ETF was originally put forward to the SEC in September 2017, but stated in the proposals that the futures markets was relatively young, and there could be no assurance that an active trading market for Bitcoin futures will develop or be maintained. Because back in September of 2017, the futures markets were nowhere near as mature as they were now. They weren't even really launched yet, to be totally honest. In 2018, they've continued to mature a lot. We've seen a lot of action on the Bitcoin futures markets, and we've seen them develop quite a bit more. So it's a much more safer option for them to be basing their Bitcoin ETF off of the futures market now than it would have been if they were trying to get this in motion back in September, October, November, December of 2017. And the last thing we want to talk about down here is this, because we've kind of covered everything that we need to talk about here down here. By this point, the regulator has only ever delayed or denied the vast number of Bitcoin ETF proposals that has been put forward to it. We talked about this a second ago. For example, the latest proposal, which was filed by the Gemini founders last month, including the longtime Bitcoin supporters and widely known investors Tyler and Cameron Winklevoss, also known as the Winklevoss twins, also known as the brothers behind the Gemini exchange, also known as the brothers who had their Bitcoin ETF denied. Back up here, that's the one that I was talking about up here. So what does this mean for the Bitcoin market? What does all this legal jargon and all this jumbo and all this crap about Bitcoin ETFs mean for the Bitcoin market? What does this mean for you, who's probably going to be trading in the next 24, 48, or 72 hours? What does this mean for the market? Where is the market going? How does this matter at all? Well, let's go ahead and talk about that, because this is all just a bunch of silly mumbo jumbo about a Bitcoin ETF, which is probably going to be denied, and we're probably not going to see a huge price action move from it. Or rather, we're not going to see a drastic change in the fundamentals of Bitcoin. We may see a big price action move, depending on how you define big. So what's going to happen over the next 24 hours to 48 hours when they deny this? Like I said, we're going to run on the assumption that they're going to deny, because based on the SEC's track record, they probably are going to deny it. What happens then? Well, what we see right now is that Bitcoin is trading sideways, and we don't see a lot of volatility in the market. We see volatility dropping off. We see volume dropping off. We can see volume dropping off quite clearly, clear as day. If we come out here to the daily chart, you see the volume is much, much lower than it has been historically. Volume is dropping off. Volatility is dropping off. Bitcoin is going sideways. The altcoins were getting a little bit of a rebound, but now they're going down again. The market is overall extremely, extremely quiet. And that, especially in conjunction with the low volatility, is a perfect storm for Bitcoin to be launched somewhere based off of a news story. Because the last two major news stories that we've seen, the last three major news stories, that we've had three different types of news stories. The last three major news stories of the last month or so has been the Gemini Bitcoin ETF being denied up here, the backed exchange being I can't speak today, I don't know why, I just woke up. Backed being announced by ICE, the Intercontinental Exchange, back over here, and then the VanEck and SolidX Bitcoin ETF being delayed back over here. So we've seen a neutral news story. We saw the neutral news story with the delay. I made that mistake the first time. The delaying of the Bitcoin ETF. We saw the backed exchange being created over here, which was a bullish news story, and we saw a bad news story over here. And in all three of those, a good, a neutral, and a bad news story, Bitcoin either went sideways or it went down. And one thing we want to point out is that all three of these news stories were bigger news stories than the one that we're talking about here. But at the same time, since there's literally nothing else going on in Bitcoin, that can kind of make this a bigger news story and make this have a bigger effect on price action than it otherwise may. And since we've seen nothing but bad things coming from any kind of news, if this does get denied over the next 24 to 48 hours, I could easily see Bitcoin dropping another couple $100 down here. Maybe coming down here, it might get support down here at 62.50. If we don't get support down here at 62.50, we could very well break 62.50, and then breaking this level of support could cause a Bitcoin ETF delaying effect, like we saw that I'll show you in just a second, where we break a level of support, and then the news plus the technicals of breaking a level of support pushes this down even more and exasperates the actual pullback. What I'm talking about is back over here when we saw the Bitcoin ETF by VanEck and SolidX be delayed. We saw Bitcoin come down here and we pulled back to a level of support down here at $6,800. And then when we broke that, the news was pushing us down because everybody's freaking out about the news and selling and panic selling and shorting. After we saw that happen, we broke $6,800, and the technicals of breaking $6,800 also pushed us down. So we saw news and technicals come in alignment, and it pushed the Bitcoin market down quite a lot, perhaps more than it should have over what was essentially a neutral news story. I'm worried about a similar thing happening here where Bitcoin pulls back down to 62.50. People get very, very excited shorting the market, even though shorts are very close to an all-time high. This is going to be the topic of tomorrow's video, by the way, because this needs to be talked about. I'm worried that a lot of people are going to start shorting if we get down here and get a little bit below 62.50 and we pull all the way back down to $6,000. With that said, even with that little perfect storm coming in the next 24 to 48 hours potentially, I don't think Bitcoin is going to break below $6,000. The bulls have been extremely strong down there. They still very well may. I've talked about in recent videos how I'm like 55 to 65% bullish. Over the next 24 hours, make that like 50 to 60% bullish, because this is probably going to have an effect on price action. I just don't know how big of an effect it is. It's not going to cause a gigantic market crash, but I would advise you guys to keep an eye on this, because when this news story does break of them denying it, which, like I said, they most likely are, then it probably is going to have a big effect on price action. So keep your attention on the news. I don't think "you guys" is an actual proper English phrase. Keep your attention on the news. If you guys are interested in keeping up with news, we have a bot in our Discord server called the Auto News Bot. I forget, well, that's not the name of the bot, but that's what I call it, the Auto News Bot. And it actually posts news articles automatically in a little channel in the Discord server. That is a really cool bot. I love that bot. If you guys are interested, you can come and join the Discord server with the link in the description down below, because that is an amazing bot. And we also have an amazing community. But tell me in the comment section down below what you think of my analysis. Do you think this Bitcoin ETF is going to be accepted or denied? I think most of you are going to say that's going to be denied. Tell me in the comments, or excuse me, tell me in a poll up here in the top right, do you think it's going to be accepted or denied? And also tell me in the comment section down below what effect you think the denial or the acceptance of this is going to have on the Bitcoin market. Do you agree with my analysis that we could come down here, perhaps get a bounce off 62.50, but if we don't, we could very easily come down to 6,000. Tell me in the comment section. As always, guys, you know I love reading your comments. It's one of the best things about doing YouTube. In fact, for a very long time, it was the best thing about doing YouTube. And in fact, actually, yeah, it still is the best thing about doing YouTube. I love talking to you guys, so tell me down there below. But anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video. I want to thank each and every single one of you for watching, as always, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.